Okay, we should be live. We should be live. SOLI Deo Gloria, welcome. Welcome, beautiful people, beautiful soul. Today we're going to be talking about letting go, tips to let go of fear and ego, removing anchors from ourselves. And I thought that first we'd get into what fear and ego are, and then I might get into some different aspects or different perspectives that I try to apply to my own life that helps me to navigate, because I'm very much a part of things here. Have children, I got to pick them up at school, or pick them up in the morning, take them to school, pick them up after school, do things like this, right? Very normal kind of day that way. The same challenges arise for most of us in general. And we also have, our deeper things, but we have a lot of opportunity in all of our days to notice our ego. And that's primarily what this is all about. Letting go of fear and ego is really about noticing it first. In order for us to notice it first, we have to cultivate a prioritization of the moment. So cultivating a presence, a mindfulness that now is where I want to be in this moment, now, here, now. I'm not anxious about a worry or depressed about some outcome that happened. I'm not elsewhere. I'm here now. That's first what we want to try to cultivate, because if we're not here now, then we're just sort of unconscious, really. We're not really in the moment, so we're not picking up what's happening, really. And it's okay, but we need to recognize where we're at as individuals. And we tend to vary in our spectrum here. We have different, sometimes we're just bored even. So in my case, for Pisces, it's quite simple and typical for a Pisces to just get bored and disappear into dreamland, right? That's pretty normal. We want to try to not really be doing that when we're engaged in what we could call like egoic activity, which means identity-based activity. Things where we're like talking with other people or like trying to accomplish things. This is where our ego and fear lay the most volatile, the most intrusive in our lives, are in these areas usually. So we have to prioritize the moment first, because in order for us to catch the ego and note it properly, we have to be here. We have to be watching our thoughts. We have to be observant of ourselves and here, not thinking about all these other things that we can think about. There's infinite number of things to think about. This is the first distraction of the ego. You could call it like the first boss is anxiety, really. Worry and anxiety, or doubt and worrying about things that might come to be or things that happened in the past. This is the first stage of dismantling the ego. It's using that essentially as a distractionary technique, you could say. So if we are wrapped up in the future or we're wrapped up in the past, then we're not really here now seeing what's going on properly, which means that we can't properly address our own ego and let go of things, basically. So we want to keep moving forward with our advancement. And so first it's anxiety, and worry and doubt. But then later it gets into more of the core fears and deeper realities that we hold as beliefs, deeper beliefs about ourselves, how we're limited, who's hurt us before and how bad they've hurt us. This is where we get into things that people call shadow work, although we were doing shadow work before when we were noticing that our anxiety isn't purposeful, our doubt isn't purposeful. These are limiting beliefs and things, we let go of doubt. But then we start to move in these other areas where we're noticing probably that fear inspires us to lie to ourselves or to sabotage ourselves or to react in any type of relational situation. And so I'm just going to get through these things here, and then I'll take a look at the comments. So appreciate you watching, and if you have comments, chat, things you want to say, throw it in there, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. I'm going to go through sort of a list of stuff I wrote down, scribbled down before we went live, but consciousness kind of responds to a moment in one of three ways. So we talked about, first, the goal is to cultivate presence, but then the second part of it is what is fear, actually? So to understand fear, we have to look at sort of consciousness first. Awareness. It responds to any moment in one of three ways. Either it's neutral, so there's no catalyst here. There's not really anything happening. The moment is just nothing, really. There's just a consistent... nothing's wrong, nothing's elated either. There's not catalyst or interesting story or narrative for the soul to get all involved in, is essentially what's happening. There's not a lesson happening. We're just sitting there. We can get lost in that space, and we can go into meditations and feel these as well. This is the neutral, non-polarized, you could call it, I call it like a benevolent neutrality, where everything just seems great. Everything's just great, but it's neutrally great. It's not like, oh my God, it's amazing, ecstatic great. It's just super great. Everything's just pretty great. That's sort of what I'm talking about with that. Love, that would mean that there's no internal shadow belief, which has densified any light into the chakra systems to create shadow. So when you're the more that you're seeing the love in the moment, the more correctly you're seeing, and the more the ratio of love to fear is what sort of discerns your overall steadiness generally. So if you're perceiving tons and tons of love in the moment, it means in that moment you don't have your weaknesses, or where you might feel threatened are not really being triggered, and you're noticing the perfection of everything. So there's so much love. And then the next moment can be the opposite, almost like this, right? So that's first, is that there's neutral love, which is a polarized experience, and then fear, which is the opposite polarity of the love experience. And so this is where an internal belief by the ego or the personality, the same sort of thing, have distorted perception enough for fear to be the dominant experience. So fear is the ratios I was talking about earlier. Fear is above love. When fear is above love, we get very confused and we go unconscious usually. We give over our agency to our, you could call it the reptilian mind, our egoic mind that just claims it knows the way to solve this, usually. We solve this by this and this and this, and we just start to act. We might react, get angry. We might start to fight something, scream, freak out. It's basically, we've forgotten what we are in the moment. We've forgotten that we're an infinite being, and we've forgotten that we're not really able to be threatened. And so we've perceived this need to act out in this way because in some type of defense. And fear, of course, has, varying degrees to that too. Just as there are degrees to love, there are degrees to fear. The more distorted the power of love is, the more fearful potential it has. So a negative entity, we could say, that is holding on to lots and lots of energy, very energized by its own negativity and love of itself, is able to very powerfully influence another entity that's playing this game with it, that's involved in this thing with it, with its own consent and free will. But the polarity of the offering, or the polarity of the experience, is discerned by how much filter is being applied by the ego, essentially. When we say ego, we're talking about the aspect of self that holds identity over God and holds like this kind of idea that I know best, that there's separation and stuff like that. So ego continues, and we've talked about this a lot on the channel. Ego continues into the next density of consciousness, but it changes the way that it shows itself. It changes as into more of just an aligned identity or aligned personality. It can be discarded, of course. So this is just, there are multiple paths to go. Some of the mystics discard all of their ego. They become a nameless nothingness that wanders about. That's a path. But generally speaking, most of us that are incarnate now are intending to awaken to what the yogis would call a householder, which is just someone who's awake and aware, but is doing the normal things that humans would do, the normal work. But to do that properly, we actually have to do this technique of noting, because we don't have the time generally to sit in meditation and note all of our ego constantly for hours and hours. We're busy. We have things going on. We could make all the excuses in the world, but it's essentially just our soul has chosen this path instead of the meditative, introspective path. This is still introspective, but it's self-contemplative instead of sitting in a stillness. More of us are drawn into this, and I would say that this path is more popular than the meditative path, but both paths work. It's not to shame any path. It's all one path, really, right? So the ego is not an entity; it's our identity, and on this particular place, at this time, our ego is generally malformed and insane. Our ego thinks it's the thing that we are. So it's crazy, right? That's the other way to look at it. The ego has become so empowered that it thinks that it's actually the being that is running the show, which couldn't be the case. And so this confrontation becomes more and more intrusive to the ego's structure, as we identify and step away from things that we couldn't possibly be to more what we are in truth. It's autonomous, it's programmatic, it's entirely fictional. The ego is simple to anticipate, and therefore simple to identify once we start to see what it is. The more we see it, the more easy it becomes to see what it is. And then ego tries to take new routes to be shady, hidey. It tries to be sneaky. It is almost as if there are, I would say, 2 to 3 different tiers of ego development before you bust out of the duality of things and start to really get the soul, Akash, and start to go, oh, and then at that point, you're not so much creating the identity, you're remembering the soul's identity after the ego shadow stuff is all shed away. That's more accurately, I think, how I would describe my experience anyway. So you step through this, first the anxiety and worry of past and future and all that. Time starts to settle itself down when you stop worrying about the future or the past. Time, it doesn't hold us as much. And that's the next sort of advancement, is to then look at, well, what about our autonomous behaviors? What about like when my child runs up to me and like tugs at my skirt and I'm cooking something and I'm busy and I kind of go, oh, get away, and I kind of freak out for a second, right? I get agitated, or maybe I don't say anything and I just grit my teeth, but I'm kind of obviously agitated. Or I don't do those things, but inside I feel agitated. Even that's worth noting, right? Noting gets more and more subtle and nuanced. So at first it's very simple. I shouted at my child when I shouldn't have really get so reactive, like they're just playing and It was inconvenient to me for various reasons, maybe many reasons. But they didn't really do anything wrong here. So I'm talking about a very specific type of situation where they didn't really do anything wrong, but in our agitation at all the parental things we're doing, we sort of take it out on them, right? It's a very common thing parents do. Parents do it constantly, because we absorb empathically or sensitively, yeah. As beings, we do this. Not just empathic beings. All entities do this. This is like normal stuff. We absorb all of our experience, and if we don't know how to like properly deal with our emotions, they build up and then they get let out at something, right? Usually at a perceived problem. It's physics almost. It's like a water dam that just cannot hold, so to speak. So it's very normal, and we have to forgive ourselves for that. We're acting insane because, first of all, we're thinking that the external reality has some type of influence on our being. So we're very engrossed in the third dimensional reality, the third density consciousness, the role we're playing. We're like very attached to some of the outcomes. So that's why we're so wrapped up in it and why we got reactive. That is what's happened, right? And it's all fine. It's all fine. It's important that we remember that what we're literally doing is we're taking the most complex machine we've ever worked with, and we're literally learning to deprogram the mind to try to come back to our nature, which is love, without harming people, really. And we do that through forgiveness, primarily. So the most effective time that we can really traverse these ego or fear lessons is immediately during, or excuse me, I got some heartburn, or directly after the engagement, like right during it or directly after. That's the primary time. That's where all the freshest juice is, you could say. How am I feeling? Like, wow, this person is hurting my feelings, right? Like, this person just told me that I am like the worst boyfriend they ever had, or the worst girlfriend they've ever had, the worst partner they've ever had, whatever. And they've told me about all of their other terrible circumstances. Usually it's part of the sharing of getting to know people, is we tend to share war stories, right? But they're telling me now that I'm the worst one. Wow. That hurts, right? That hurts. Immediately that fear comes up, the lack, the look, see, the world can't see you. The world can't see you. They can't see you. See that? Wow. The ego, like, literally uses the sense perceptions to create the illusion that there is separation, and that this person that has just said nonsense somehow has meaning. And it truly doesn't have meaning. It's truly more that they're expressing to themselves how much they are pulled away from themselves in that moment. That's really all that's happened. But because they're referencing us and pointing at us, we're going to internalize that as ours, because we use our ears and we use our eyes instead of using our heart, which our heart just sees the divine soul and the spark that's there. So the truth of the matter is that all of that shit they said didn't happen and isn't real. And any shit we said after also didn't happen and isn't real. It's part of the illusion. And you know, some people would talk about this as like some type of bypassing of ourselves, or like not taking account or responsibility of what we're doing. It's not about that really. This is about taking responsibility and authentic honesty in oneself over every little thing we do. And forgiveness of it is necessary. So if we're talking about it in this open way, it can come across like, oh, I was an asshole, and then I'm fine with it. Because that's where we have to go. We have to become fine with the idea that I was an asshole there. Yeah, okay, I was. Now I can move on. Until we see the behavior, we can't accept that it was even there. We have to see that, like, I was not in my right mind. This is how I like to frame it. I was not in my right mind. I see now the error that I made. I was seeing all this separation, and I was feeling all of this pain in my past, and now I claim insanity in all of that. And then I ask God to help me see it true. And then I usually tend to see it so much differently. And then the whole thing melts away because Sean's illusions of it all just become so unreal. They become nothing really other than just dreams or just foggy remembrances of like made up stories is really how powerful they are. They're not powerful. They're just these hazy things. The truth of God is that these two souls loved each other. That's so much more strong. And the rest of it is like just not really real. And as that becomes our general and cemented place of being, it becomes almost challenging for the universe to sway us from our centeredness or our peace. But that's how we do it, though, is by noticing every time we're disturbed, we have to take responsibility. Oh, I'm confused. It's my responsibility. I'm confused because something's disturbed me, which means I've forgotten myself for a second. I forgot who I was for a moment there when they cut me off in traffic and I gave them the finger. I thought that this car cutting in front of me had something to do with me. I thought that I was a limited being in a car, right? Like I forgot who I was. And we forget constantly. The trick is that most people think that in order to be in the world, you have to forget. And that's not true. That's not true at all. What more starts to occur is you bring the truth of what you are into the pretend, the make-believe. And that's primarily what I do. It's like I'm literally looking around like feeling a lot of times like I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. Like I'm not sure if like I'm allowed in here. Is this like against the rules for me to watch like this and be here like this? Because it feels like that. It feels like I'm not really supposed to be here this way. I'm seeing too much of people. I'm seeing too many things. It doesn't seem fair. And most of the things that are the deepest revelations can't actually be shared with our voice or in written word, really. So I'm thinking of ways to learn how to transmit information with my hands or something, but that's still a work in progress. Anyways, I'm not sure why I'm getting there, but forgiveness of ourselves is probably the most critical part of any of our forgetful behavior. Our forgetful behavior is because we believed something about ourselves that caused us to feel that we're limited. Therefore, we must protect or defend or attain, get something to make us not so limited, to protect us in our limitation. So the more we keep reminding the ego, hey, ego, this is a good way to frame it. We're not fighting, killing anything. We're not destroying anything. We're telling ego, hey, remember how you thought you were like a broken piece of shit? Well, let's just say you're not that. You're a costume that I wear, right? And we're gonna make you really cool. We're gonna make you pretty snazzy. right? We're going to make you a pretty chill bro to hang with. But in order to do that, you need to shut up and just sit down and just listen to what you're being told by Spirit. Just shut up and sit down and be good. Be a good boy, right? We need to, at least it helped me a lot to think of the ego as like a being, even though it's not. It helped me to think of the ego as a being that I'm like learning to mold. The problem is with the ego is that we've been developing it unconsciously for years and years. So we have patterned responses to basically everything. And we can go a really drastic way and reprogram the brain by literally sort of sitting around noticing, I don't know what I see. I don't know what I hear. Everything I'm thinking now is not what I think it is. The beings I see are not who I think they are. Like, we can reprogram it by just repeating this stuff to ourselves. But without guidance, that's a messy place to go. So instead, I would recommend what we do is we notice right after we get autonomatron on people. Right after we go robotic ego. We send an angry text and our mom bugs us and we, mind your business, mom, right? Whatever it is. We freak out for a second. That's when the real fruit is right there. Like, oh, what am I feeling right now? Oh my God, I'm feeling all of the shit from when I was a child and my mom was telling me nonsense and I couldn't speak up then. And I'm speaking up now because this shit she just said is nonsense. So now it's my chance to tell her, right? We're feeling all of that. Oh, so much clarity. Oh, I get it. I've been holding this forever. But we don't notice that if we're like just all fueled in the rage and we don't realize that it's the story itself is interesting, but no, we're looking to find the source of things. We're looking to find, like, shine a flashlight, so to speak, on where did you start growing? Like, who planted you, right? Like, this tree of shadow has grown and it's casting this weird shade on your harvest of your consciousness. So where did that get planted and what happened with that? And as we begin to just continually remember, I'm unlimited, I'm one with God, God is well pleased in me, therefore, there is no problem. That's absolute. It does not matter if the globe is warming and it's going to melt. God's pleased with me. So I'm good. You know, if the earth melts today, I'm good. God's pleased with me. I'm one with everything. I'm an infinite and eternal being. As we remind ourselves of that, then any limited issue couldn't really be a problem, right? Couldn't be an actual issue. It's just something we're making up. And the trick, honestly, the biggest trick of moving through fear and ego is authenticity with yourself, honesty with yourself. And I don't know exactly how to teach this. I don't think it can be taught. Like, you have to stop bullshitting yourself. And it's, I got really lucky in my experience where one day I saw the bullshitter and I was like, whoa, eyes wide open. Never again was I not able to see the bullshitter. And it caused me almost like psychotic, schizophrenic type of symptoms. Because there's this shit talker in my mind all the time and I could see it and I didn't know what to do with it. Luckily, it all led to this, where I had to self-investigate for years on end, and now we can speak to it, right? So I wanted to go through a couple different pieces of, like, different things that I go through day to day where I use these, I guess, techniques. So the first is like, say my kids are fighting, right? And they're not doing anything wrong necessarily, but I can sense that there's probably going to be somebody who's going to get hurt. This is probably not going to go well. As a father, I don't really want them fighting each other, but at the same time, I can tell they're playing fighting. And I'm not sure what to do, right? Now, from the ego mind, we notice that there's these different decision points. It all branches off. It's like, well, I could do this and then this happens, or I could do that and then this happens, or I could do this and then this happens. And what I've been experimenting with more is like, God, show me what to do. Let me do it now. And I literally call for it, trust it's going to happen, and let it happen. And that's been better. That's been better. But when we're going the ego way, the mind way, we could say, we're either going the heart way or the mind way, really, in any of this. But if we're going the mind way, we're going to say, okay, we're going to say something like, if you keep fighting, I'm going to take away your TV time, or I'm going to try to punish you, or like we try to make up these rules or these things. Whereas the heart way often is like almost counterintuitive to that. Like, for example, I might jump in to what they're doing and start just pretending I'm like a sheriff who's going to lock them up and take them to jail, or something, like jump into the game that's being played and make it a funny little thing and just diffuse all of it. We can't think of that opportunity when we're in the mind. It doesn't see that opportunity for this weird kind of interesting fun way to end conflict. The mind just goes, oh, I have these different ideas of how we end conflict. I've seen my parents end conflict with me and my siblings. Here's what they did. I'm going to do that now. Right? So afterwards, really what we want to do is take a little bit of a reflection on any interactions we're having with humans, literally all the time. It sounds like a tall order, and maybe it is, but those of us who are obsessed with becoming purely awake, like, we don't really have any other true desire. So we may as well put it to good use, which is analyzing all interactions with all humans all the time. Like, so deeply that people would think it's crazy. People would think it's crazy, but they'd be wrong. We want to analyze, well, they said this and then I said this, and then okay, and but we're not, it's not so much about what happened, it's about our feelings about each thing and how we responded, why we said this, why we said that. A lot of times we'll notice, I'm not sure why I said that. Why did I say that? Interesting. I think I was trying to deceive them. Wow. I didn't think I was a deceptive person. No, I was clearly trying to deceive someone here. Wow. Strange, right? Like, we have to notice all that shit. We can't really notice that if we're lying to ourselves. So authenticity is so important. I'm going to jump into the chat now. Thank you guys for listening to me ramble for almost 40 minutes. Oh, hi, Debbie. Hi, Sean. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Susie. That's an awesome name. Different path, same destination. Exactly. I think we were talking about meditation and stuff back then, around that time. Yeah, and even meditation, I like to mix with prayer. And Michael Murdad actually does the same thing. We call it communion. He calls it communion. I stole that from him. I do the same thing, but he made a name for it, which is, I guess, communion, where you're praying but meditating. Like, you're going into meditation and then having a conversation with divinity, really. So that's my favorite, is like mixing all of it together. Sarah T says, to find ourselves in correct time is to be in the heart always. It is why Christ anchored the consciousness here for the particular time, for this particular time, this initiation, the Sacred Heart. Yeah, I agree, 100%. The heart sees properly, and our instruments, eyes don't, and ears don't hear properly. And the way the heart sees is, usually through the inner sight, or the pineal gland, the third eye, is what helps us see. And before many of us were bodies, we only saw with that one eye. So Sarah says, your description of seeing the bullshitter reminds me of the process we go through when we start ascending, where we must pass through the lower astral plane, which is essentially a mirror. It can be excruciating to some people, never make it through, though they haven't cultivated enough spiritual energy to elevate beyond that realm, beyond the fear and untruths. Must pass through the lower astral plane. Interesting. I would like to hear more about that. The lower astral plane and the mirror. I think you're talking about the veil of Paraketh. So what it sounds like you're talking about is the veil of Paraketh. So I don't know if you've heard of that, but if you haven't, it might be somewhere to look at if you've seen visions or seen aspects of the lower astral holding us, anchoring us down. And then when we break through or not, there's a veil of Paraketh, is what it's been called in magic circles. I think that might be what you're talking about. Mind seems to speak first, then the heart, so it's a matter of keeping open. Yeah, that's interesting you say that. I'm going to need to reflect on that a little more myself. Thank you, Dan, for that insight. I think that the mind speaks first when it has control. When it doesn't have control, it waits for the heart to listen. There is no speakingness happening really from the heart, right? To speak is a masculine mind thing, right? So it's more of the mind speaks without waiting to hear what the heart has to say, or the mind waits to hear what the heart has to say and then speaks. I think is how I'm feeling it now anyway. I don't like the heart can't speak really. It can speak in some beautiful ways through singing, things like that, like art in some way, poetry. The heart can start to speak through the blue in that type of demonstration of just effulgent light and love. But as far as actually speaking, the speakingness is the masculine sort of doingness of things. It's bringing into physicality the heart's feelings, or it's just bringing its own thoughts. If it's ignoring its woman, basically. If the man is ignoring his wife, he's just, I think that we should do that, and then, don't worry about what the heart says. No, don't worry about that. We're gonna go down that way into that dark alley over there. Then, yeah, right. I don't know what that voice was or what any of that was, but that's kind of what it's like. And the mind's just not listening to the heart. And to be fair, a lot of times the heart is closed off, protected. It's like there's too much distortion happening, and the soul or the divinity within us can't actually be threatened. Part of the reason it can't be threatened is because these barriers go up that we create to protect ourselves from the nonsense of the illusion that we play in. That's what allows us to not actually be truly wounded ever, and continue through all these stories of different horrendous things all over the place, all over the universe, or the multiverse, or however you want to frame that. On people being obsessed with waking up reminded me of when I was expressing about wondering which which kind of water would be best to drink. He called me one-dimensional. The irony. That's funny. Sarah T says, I'm talking about the eighth sphere, Steiner's work. I'll check it in the veil you mentioned. Upon research, I was able to relate back to my own experiences in the dark night, in the dark beings I encountered. Sarah says it felt like a huge spiritual battle and like a murky dimensional plane. I think a lot of people get stuck, and I think they're tapping into the higher plane. It's this sphere just outside of Earth. Just outside of Earth. Yeah. So it's interesting. So it sounds like you're talking about the astral stuff that's going on. It's like because there are obviously the unmanifest and the manifest realms, right? It sounds like you're talking about the unmanifest realms and the fear that is manifest in the unmanifest. Like you can visit with all of these. Yeah, unable to. Oh, you know what? Maybe Sarah, maybe you could email me. I'd love to talk with you about this because it sounds like you have a good understanding of it. Maybe email me, like, if you want, or on Instagram you can DM me. Words of a Wizard or Sean the Hero 1111 at gmail.com. I'd be interested to talk about that more, especially the battle part, because there's been a battle going on for a long time, and like you said, people get stuck in the battle part, and when they when they activate the Merkaba and start to move around and look at things more infinitely, they get lost in the drama. It's another sort of risk for the wanderer, especially if they've come from a higher density sixth or something. They're not participatory generally in those types of things, but they get stuck in them the same way. It's through this like entering into the astral body and then moving into these experiences, seeing these things, and then having these desires to like fight with the light forces or do whatever they're doing. I wouldn't call it a trap, but it's not generally where most wanderers want to like go. Generally, like those are for the beings that are in fourth, fifth density consciousness. That's what they're doing. And so sometimes we can, like, the way I'm seeing it now is like there are different classrooms. And so as wanderers, we're walking down the hall and we look into a classroom, the fourth density beings, they're learning about love. We're like, oh, that's cool. I get it. Then we go to the fifth density, they're learning about wisdom, and we're like, okay, I get it. Then we go to the sixth density and they're learning about the law of one or unity. If we looked into the fourth density classroom and we're like, this seems really exciting, I'm going to go in here. Like, we get all invested into this thing. That's why on this channel, like, I don't talk so much about like negative forces and what they do or don't do. I generally talk about how interesting everything is. I try to put a positive spin on everything. The things that we see in the astral mirror and reflect what we see in the physical as well. So, and then there are people that can see, just like you just said, the timelines. There are some people that have this like incredible ability to see the timelines really clearly. For me, I think my capacity is more in concepts. The timelines, I don't see what others see. It's challenging really to talk about it, but Joni says, hi Sean, is the ego and fear really there to help us grow as it offers us different comparison to the Christ consciousness? There are a couple different opinions on this. Is it there to help us grow? Generally, yeah. Generally, that's the case. Here, it's being negatively manipulated. So there are forces, we could say, entities that are preying on the egoic frequencies specifically to keep our beings as unconscious as possible. So generally, yes, the ego is as a required part of animalistic survival as consciousness evolves from first, second, into third density. It becomes aware of self. Oh, I'm a self. I have my own being, like a dog, your pet might be engaging in third density consciousness. Whereas like a cow that, or not a cow, but like a bird that's just flying around is a second density creature. Consciousness does that, where it evolves that way, but also it gets placed. So we were placed, our human consciousness, or vehicles, you could say, instruments, bodies, were created by extraterrestrial forces that put them here, seeded them here, so that consciousness would grow. It was all done in benevolent ways, generally. But where there's a bright light, it attracts other forces, you could say. And, other forces came in and started to manipulate. So ego and fear are different things. So I would say ego is identity, which is important. For me to be anything that does anything in this reality, I have to be something. I have to have some type of being here, of some kind. Even if I say I'm the Son of God, Christ, like I could say, I am Christ reincarnate. I'm still identifying, right? So that would be ego, is the identity, the identification of something that we are not, but something that we're being in the illusion of separation. It all anchors back into that Christ presence and becomes this this truth of the purity that Jesus showed us, but also Buddha and Krishna. They showed us in these different ways, Christ consciousness. So the ego uses fear. Fear is generally built from trauma, but also built from imagined trauma as well. Horror movies, or your father telling you that black people are scary, or some racist weird thing, right? Like, and I hope it's clear. I'm not saying that that's a thing. I'm saying that that's insanity, right? I'm not saying we should be scared of other races. I hope that's clear. Sarah says it's where all the divergent timelines go. If it isn't anchored in Christ, it's divergent and degenerative. Yes, please do. For navigating timelines, it's more of a feeling thing and paying attention to the source of what I'm trying to create. If I'm sourcing externally, it has a finite source and rooted divergent timeline. That's interesting. I think you're probably seeing the same things I'm seeing. We're just using different languages for it. Because essentially, I see it the same. If you're creating from outside of Christ, you're creating in fear, which causes entropy in the light form. Whatever is being manifested, the light matrix of whatever you're making has holes in it because there's fear. So if it's external, then you're already basing your creation on something that was built in entropy and fear already. So if we base creation on the physical world, we will always suffer from it. Always. We may not suffer, but we'll lose it. It'll die. It'll not work out. It can't. It can't, right? No external validation necessary. No following trends that don't feel aligned out of fear of not being loved. You are coherent to the many. You are the many. It's hard. Yeah, it is hard actually when we don't have external validation needs. Actually, that's one of the harder ones. Is I would say that noticing our own ego, the side effect of this, guys, that people don't tend to talk about, is that you'll see it in others all the time. And because most of them are unconscious about it, they're not aware how manipulative and arrogant and whatever they're being. They don't realize. Like they don't see it at all. So it can appear like they're being quite ridiculous to us or horrible to us even. And they can be so just unconscious to it. But we've seen it because it's clear to us, and we forget. We forget. I've been in this position where, you know, just people have been just ways that are so covertly egotistical. It's so covert. It's almost subconscious, right? And we question. We're like, did they know they're doing that? Do they know they're being that way? And the ego knows what it's doing. Yeah, the ego knows that it's being that way, but the being is not aware of it at that moment. The being itself, the soul can't actually see what the ego is doing that way. It's this weird little game of chess that's happening where the ego and the soul kind of make moves, you could say. I'm still learning about that, but I'm hoping to figure that out a bit better so I can talk about it more. But yeah, please send me an email, Sarah. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to chat more. It'd be great. Like you always have so many things, and honestly, like you seem to be so much better read than me. I should probably like vet these topics through you, to be honest. All right. I appreciate all you. I think that's time to let it go. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah. And if you guys want to email any questions or any things going on, questions about anything metaphysical, spiritual, ghosts, whatever, email it to seanthehero1111@gmail.com. And we'll have a chit chat about it. Thank you for spending your time with me. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful Sunday.